Okay, so the recording and the transcription have started now, eventually. So as usual, you're more than welcome to come in, more than welcome to ask questions. And you can do that just by turning on your microphone. But if you don't want to be recorded, you can put your question into the chat and it won't go up onto YouTube. That's not part of what's recorded. So we're moving on to the C. We're moving on to compliance today. Things are moving fast. Just to give you an idea of where we are in our course. This is the 27th, so we're on to compliance. We will do that for 2 weeks, this week and next week. Then we'll do a little on control. Then we'll have legislation questions. Now remember, it's questions because we don't cover the legislation as part of lectures, but all the legislation and all the information about it is in your student document, including links to lectures about all of these things. Okay. So if you do want to hear me talking about it, not a problem. It's all there. But what we won't be doing is I won't be giving a lecture in it as part of this course. Instead, what you're expected to do is go and look at the legislation and just make sure that you're comfortable with it. But if you're not, we've got a week put aside for questions about legislation. And then the week following that is flagged up for student-led revision. And that's basically anything in the course, anything anywhere about anything that you want to go over, to ask questions about, anything at all. In other words, by that point, hopefully you're well underway with your report, and that will, if there's things that you're not sure about, that will give you the chance to come back and ask about them. So we are definitely on the downhill now. And as I say, today is our first of a 2-part compliance week. First of 2 compliance weeks. It's Monday. Sorry, I'll catch up eventually. So we've done governance, how organisations have to be given aims, goals, approaches to do it. Different to management, but important to know what an organisation is trying to do. We have looked at risk, so all the risk that's involved with the organisation for all sorts of different types of risk that might apply. So now we're on to compliance, and compliance is very simply the idea that we need to meet our responsibilities legislatively. Now, these are most often legislative. They could be other, they could be professional responsibilities. So if you're a lawyer, you may have compliance to the Scottish Solicitors Code of Conduct, for example. You have to comply with that in the same way as you have to comply with GDPR. So it's mostly legislative, but not solely legislative, depending on which area you are in. So as I say, there could be stuff if you're a lawyer, there could be other things if you're involved in the health service. Accountants have professional standards that they have to get to, and the cyber students will remember last year when we talked about computing professional standards. But we won't cover those because they are specific to particular industries. We're going to stick mostly to legislative responsibilities. And as I say, we're not going to go into detail on the legislation. but some of the more relevant ones, both for IT and more widely, are in the legislation section. So please go through those in your own time. For lots of organisations, certainly ones that have any sense, the C in GRC has a double meaning. So clearly, legislative issues are first and foremost, but lots of organisations take the approach that if we are putting in systems, processes, software, if we are putting in things to ensure that we are legislatively compliant, why don't we use those same systems to look at our own performance and decide how we are going to not just meet standards, but exceed standards? In other words, we can put in controls for our business that we want to match. And I think the example that I've used before is if you're involved in mail order, there are parts to the legislation that say how long people have before you have to respond to them. That's legislative compliance. But as part of your organisation, you might decide that you want to exceed that compliance part and say, well, if we've got 2 weeks to reply, we're going to be better than our competitors and we'll reply within a week. So you can set that up as a control. So you can use the same sorts of procedures, but say, no, we want to know if we exceed this 1 week. We won't break the law, but it's not our standards. So people use that in all sorts of places. I'm actually not aware of any legislation on how long it takes to answer the phone, but if you're running a contact centre, you absolutely want to know how long it takes to answer the phone. How many rings before someone answers? How long are they on the phone before they speak to a real person? Those are controls that can be used as part of the rest of your systems. And we will talk a wee bit about controls in a separate section. But for today, we're going to stick to compliance. Now, there are all sorts of compliance types. Absolutely impossible to cover all of them, because otherwise we'd be doing a course in law. And even that's a lie, because if you do a course in law, there are all sorts of optional modules that you can do depending on which type of law degree you want to follow. So clearly the idea that we can cover all of legislation in this course is just fanciful. So we'll not even attempt to try. What I will do, though, is look at kind of general types of legislation. Ones that most organisations will have to be well aware of, if not all. And you can see them on the screen there. So we'll look at them in broad categories of financial compliance, trade compliance, environmental compliance, and privacy compliance. Most organisations these days come across these types of thing in one form or another. So we'll start off with financial compliance. So as ever, if you have questions, stick them in the chat. I'm not seeing anything just now. I haven't heard anybody come in, but don't hesitate to stop if you have questions. Not surprisingly, financial compliance is quite high on the list of priorities for most organisations, and it's quite high on the list of priorities for most countries as well. So there are lots of regulations and laws corresponding to what you have to do for your organisation. The simplest one is you have to complete a set of accounts and submit them to Companies House if you're a private or public limited company. You literally have to sign off saying that the accounts are correct. That might be okay if you're a small organisation. It's just you working in a newsagent. and you're the one behind the till and adding up their takings every day, yeah, you'll be fine. You can sign those off with a clear conscience and know that there'll be nothing missed. Or if you're the chief executive or the chairperson of a bank with 500 branches and 2 million customers, and each customer has an average of 200 transactions per month. Plus you have all the other sections in your bank, which means that you are performing billions of transactions every year. You've got to sign those off in the accounts. You're going to go through every one of those billion transactions and see whether it's okay. Would you even know if it's okay? Of course not. You need to rely on some systems. You need to rely on systems that are looking at every transaction and making sure that they're all okay. That way you can stay legislatively compliant. There are also other things that you may have to comply with. So some countries put everything into legislation. More sensible countries say, no, this is a law around the accounts. This is what you'll do. This is what you'll provide, and you cannot change. Other less evolved countries, the ones where people go, oh no, I went to Eton with him. He's a good chap. He would never defraud us. They tend to have standards rather than laws, which can often lead to issues. Because, of course, a lot of the legislation came in as a result of financial scandals. So things like in America, you have the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, named after the people that brought it in. And that's to ensure that financial transactions are well regulated. And that was in response to some particular issues in the early part of this millennium. Others looked at those and said, oh no, we just need to make them promise harder. So as I say, they have different approaches. That said, depending on who you work for, you might have to take into account multiple approaches. It might be that you deal in multiple countries. So you're not just looking at the financial legislation in one country, it's in all of the countries in which you do business. It starts getting tricky, as you can imagine. Another place where having an automated system can really help. And of course, there are companies that will provide those systems to ensure that you comply with the law. America, for example, just on a personal basis, everyone has to do a tax return. So here you can choose to do a tax return, or you can just choose to get taxed at source. Americans do a tax return every year. It's a staple of their sitcoms. That every so often somebody will bring out a shoebox full of receipts and say, yes, here's my tax returns, and everybody will laugh as all these bits of paper flutter onto the table and down onto the floor. Companies take advantage of that by providing software to allow you to create a tax return. And what these companies do is they say, okay, we will guarantee that the stuff that we create complies with the tax return laws of this year. So if anything goes wrong, we'll indemnify you against that. In the commercial sphere, there are organizations that do similar sorts of things. They say, yes, our systems, our account systems absolutely comply with the law as it stands. And the as it stands bit's important because you might need to change your software to comply with new tax regulations or new personal income tax or national insurance changes or VAT changes or whatever it happens to be. Regardless, financial compliance is a core part of every organisation's approach to compliance. The next one is about trade management. So, of course, this won't apply to all organisations. Not everybody's selling things. If you're a community development trust, to take an example out of thin air. Sorry, I thought I'd muted everything. Clearly not. If you're a community development trust, you're probably not selling things. You're providing services. You are facilitating. You're possibly not selling. I mean, you might be, depending on what sort of projects you get involved in. You aren't always selling. And even if you are selling, you're selling on a local basis where everybody is working to the same laws. But what if you're a bigger organisation? What if, heaven forbid, you are a company which does a lot of trade in Europe, and suddenly, due to some baffling choices made, suddenly have to set up a whole new set of trade management regulations to deal with all these companies that before you just didn't have to think about. What if you deal in America or Australia? What are the regulations? Even worse, what if you're selling to some place like Iraq or Iran or Russia? There are going to be rules and regulations in place about that kind of stuff. And probably most of you saw last year the sanctions that were put into place against Russia after they invaded Ukraine. So these things change, like everything else. So you're going to have to understand these rules and regulations. You have to be able to know where it's going, whether you're allowed to sell to those places, the amount that you're allowed to sell, what the tax requirements are, how they have to be labelled, and 100 other details that you might need. That's why people sign up to trade agreements, because it makes it so much easier to perform that kind of trade. You'll never remove administration, but if you can have one set of administrative rules for as many people as possible, clearly that makes things a lot easier. Where you can't, you can actually employ third parties. So in the same way as you can have a third party who will understand accounting laws and tax regulations and all that kind of thing, you can employ companies that understand shipping regulations, what you have to do to send things to other places. Now, they don't take away the burden in the same way as I described for the personal tax software. It's still down to you to make sure that you're compliant, but at least these other companies have experience in doing that kind of stuff. So you can bring in expertise for that in the same way as you can 1,000 other things in an organisation. Everyone happy so far? Okay. Next one then is environmental compliance. Anybody recognise where this is? Just put something into the chat if you recognise where we are in this picture.
Oh, Glasgow?
It is, it's Glasgow, and as Ben says, whether he's recognised it or whether he's read it off the sign there, that's Queen Street. So that's Queen Street Station, just that kind of arc there. And right behind it, you can see a massive cooling tower. Now, I've never yet managed to find out what that cooling tower was from. I don't know if it was a power station or some kind of industrial plant or whatever. But look how close that is to the centre of Glasgow. Imagine what's coming out of that tower all day, every day. You can just about see it on the picture. There's smoke coming out the top of that. And in fact, if you do know what it was there, please let me know, because I would love to know. Can you imagine anyone building that kind of facility in the middle of a city now? Kingston Power Station, was it, David? Oh, excellent. Thank you. I'll be on Google shortly. Can you imagine? And given the date of this picture, I'm going to suggest that that was a coal-based power station. Can you imagine burning hundreds of tons of coal a day in the middle of a city? And all the emissions that come out for that and all the stuff that you're breathing in? It just wouldn't happen now. And the history of environmental compliance is about things that people have stopped doing, quite rightly too. This isn't a complaint. This isn't one of those stupid Daily Mail things about health and safety gone mad. This is, thank goodness we have done this, because people were literally dying. Which is why it's very odd to see some governments trying to roll back these restrictions. You know, a healthy dose of carbon monoxide from a coal-fired power station never did anybody any harm. Yeah, well, it did. So the environmental protections are a good thing. And lots of legislation has been introduced for that. And you can see some of them on there. Some of them are general ones. Health and safety at work clearly applies to any workplace. Some of them are more specialised. Control of substances hazardous to health regulations, which are regulations that are tacked onto the Health and Safety at Work Act, commonly known as COSH. It's all the things that happen if you spill chemicals or that kind of stuff. And there's a reason I've chosen that. Anybody want to guess why I've chosen the control of substances hazardous to health regulations for this kind of general presentation? Nope, no guesses. Anybody think of what substances hazardous to health might be in just about every workplace in the country? Well, if you can't, exactly one of the ones I was thinking about, Caroline. I was about to say, if you can't, you've clearly never gone near a cleaner's cupboard and looked at the massive packages of bleach and ammonia and all the other stuff in there, which is quite nasty on its own and spectacularly nasty if it's mixed. Cleaners have to do actual courses on this stuff to make sure that they don't create noxious gases that will kill people with their cleaning products. Anybody ever changed the toner in a laser printer and spilled any of the toner out of the cartridge? Hope you didn't. Breathe it in. Definitely not good for you. And here's a hint, if you ever do spill stuff, don't use warm water. You just melt it onto whatever you spill it onto, including your skin. So there's all these sorts of things that are around that you possibly might not think about. Someone's got to think about them. Someone's got to make sure that you're compliant with all the legislation. Someone's got to make sure that if someone's desktop PC is broken and you need to throw it away, that you're compliant with the Waste Electrical and Electronic Equipment Directive, and that you don't just chuck the PC into the black bin and think, aye, that's fine. You just can't do it anymore. And there are all sorts of government departments that will get very upset if you try to. The next one is privacy. And again, we're all seeing that. Whether you work in computing or not, you see privacy legislation popping up all the time. Literally sometimes. If you go to a new website and it pops up saying, which cookies can we store? But you see it everywhere. You see it. Sometimes I have to sort of look back a wee bit for examples. But here's one from 3 days ago. The Royal Mail managed to get their... Oh, there we go. Privacy popping up because I haven't been to that website anymore before. So the Royal Mail managed to get all their data locked and held to ransom. That's just the most recent one that I know about, but there are hundreds of them. But of course, if you're setting up a website, say you're setting up a website for a community association or for a newly merged company, you're going to have privacy concerns. No matter which type of industry you're in, you're going to have to conform to these privacy issues. It used to be that it was only if you cared about IT that you cared about these things, but everyone knows about them. And of course, depending on what you do, you might have to conform to more than one set of regulations. GDPR was a European-wide initiative and still is, and GDPR is still in the UK. But those of you that did my course last year will remember that I've left up some things in terms of which legislative bodies we come under, because things like GDPR are still European laws, even though they've been subsumed into UK law. And the definitely threat, is that Westminster will bring in a whole new set of privacy laws to replace GDPR. So if you have any sort of public-facing system, you're going to have to conform to the UK privacy laws. But if anybody from outside the UK could access it, you're going to have to conform to their privacy laws as well, doubling your work. Good luck. Of course, none of this would have happened if people actually read their terms and conditions. But of course, no one does that either.
I can't even read English! Hey, shut up in there! You all agreed to stay quiet.
Hey, let me out of here! This is a mistake! I agreed by accident!
You can't agree by accident. There's a fail-safe built in. Even if you click on agree, another little window pops up that says, "Are you sure you agree?" And you have to click on agree again.
What are you going to do to us?
So that's the kind of overview of the kind of categories of compliance that you might want to think about. Anybody get any questions? All gone very quiet. Okay, so for this afternoon, cyber people will be doing this tutorial. But we'll talk about that later. Okay, so I've got one more to do today, but we're 50 minutes in, so that's definitely time to take a break. So do you want to go make a cup of tea, and I'll see you back here in 15, please. Okay? See you back in 15 minutes. Okay, so we're back. Just for once, I actually managed to have time to make my cup of tea. Excuse me. Okay, so we finished just before the break there, thinking about different areas of compliance. And has anyone thought of any questions that they want to ask about that before we move on? Okay, thanks, Ben. All right, in that case, what we'll do is we'll go on and talk about internal controls. Now, I want to be clear when we're talking about this, particularly as I spoke about controls in another aspect earlier. What I mean by controls here is still about compliance. They are the compliance controls, if you like. What is it that you have to do in order to be compliant? If you open an account for someone in a bank, what is the control to be compliant? Well, the controls are you need 2 forms of identification. You need to know that the money that you're depositing didn't come from crime. You know, all these kind of controls go into opening an account. So it's not control in the extension to compliance sense, it's control in the compliance sense. So it's about compliance with legislation, not about commercial advantage. So hopefully that's clear. So we can start to talk about the controls themselves. Now, setting up controls will be very much dependent on the organisation of which you're a part, because there will clearly be different legislation involved depending on which area your organisation works. Regardless of that, there are real benefits for every organisation in doing this. And you can see some of them on the screen there. It's going to be less expensive. If you automate these types of things, so if you put in some sort of system that automates these checks, then you have fewer errors. And it means that you can spend your time worrying about those errors, the exceptions that happen, rather than thinking about the day-to-day stuff, because that should all happen automatically. And because you've got all that in place, because you've set up all these things, because you can demonstrate that you've done all these things, then you can show that you're regulatory compliant. That's not to say things won't go wrong. That's not to say there won't be mistakes. That's not to say you won't occasionally break some of the legislation. But at least when you do, you can say, look, 10,000 transactions, 9,999 of them, absolutely fine. We went through the legislation with a fine-tooth comb. We've tried to follow it. Look, you can see all the evidence here. Yes, this one went wrong. We're sorry about that. And we'll put in even more controls to check that it doesn't happen again. But at least that's what you're doing. You're saying, we've got all this evidence and one thing went wrong. We had a 0.01% error rate. So we'll do our best to make it down to a 0.001 error rate. How can you do that? Well, the first thing you have to do is understand what it is that's applicable to you. So you are going to have people who understand the legislation and the regulations and any professional issues that you're going to need to comply with as well. So it's about understanding the legislative framework. What's out there and how does it apply to you? Your organisation, that is. Once you have those in place, once you understand what they all are, you then have to figure out who is involved in that. If it's a financial one, well, clearly the accounts department's going to be involved. But actually, maybe the sales department's involved to make sure that they take orders properly. Maybe the procurement department's involved in order to ensure that the stuff that they buy, in order to make the stuff that you sell, is all done properly. So you have to look at the organisation holistically, thinking about all the different parts to the organisation, all the different people that are involved, all the different stuff that they do, to get that clear link between the legislation on one side and who and what is involved in the other. Once you've got that, you've got a better idea of where the risks are. Have you accepted an order from Iraq? Maybe someone should have checked that first. As I say, later on, you can extend that to internal controls. There's no law against accepting an order without a payment, but in terms of a commercial approach, it might not be the best thing to do. Once you have that, you can start to create the control descriptions. Do not accept orders from sanctioned countries. Somewhere you have a list of sanctioned countries, Iran, Iraq. That can then get updated. So as I said, last year it would be updated to add Russia. So you can set up the name and then start to put in some things that you're checking against with these controls. And then you can start to implement them. Now, if you have lots and lots of people and you don't mind paying them lots and lots of money to check out all these different risks, then go for it. But isn't it easier to set up an automated system that says, what's the address on this order? Iraq? I don't think so. Who's ordered something here? Have they paid us? Has the credit card gone through? If not, I don't think so. So whatever it happens to be, you have to understand what the legislation is, understand how that affects your organisation, and then create that map so that everyone can clearly understand what it is you're checking against. Now, just like anything that you do, you're unlikely to get it right the first time, so you have to start testing. You will test the controls that you've set up against all the different things that you need to do. And there's a couple of ways that you can do that. The preventative ones are making sure that you don't do things that you shouldn't have done. Don't accept the order to Iraq before you've checked it. Don't issue a payment on the say-so of one member of staff. So that's a legislative and a control option. Sometimes, though, you can't. Things are happening too fast, or things may change, or you may have different options. What if you're working in a financial company? And normally you would say, oh no, we don't want to allow anyone to spend more than £1 million. Well, actually, you might have traders that are trading in hundreds of millions of pounds. You can't just go, well, hope it goes okay. Instead, what you would have is a detective check. So after something has happened, you would go through it. You can't do it at the time because, you know, people are making trades in real time to try and make money. By the time you've done the check, the opportunity's gone and you lose. So you allow them to do it, but then you do a detective check. You detect any errors after they've happened. Hopefully there will be fewer and fewer of those as you get an automated system that can actually run in real time, but not always. So you set up your systems, you then do the tests manually or automatically. And then if something goes wrong, you have to fix it. So if you find a problem, what are you going to do? Well, it's got to be someone's job to do it. So you're going to have to assign someone, hopefully someone that understands about that particular issue, understands the legislation, understands the organisation, understands how it all fits together, and can understand how best to fix it. Again, that's where automated systems can help. If you know that the issue is in the accounts department, then you can assign an automatic task to the finance director to say, yep, it's your job to sort this, let us know when it's done. And you might copy in the accounts manager or the sales manager, depending on what the control is and how you've set it up. But again, just doing it automatically can help. All of these things, if you can do them automatically, can help. So you set them up beforehand. You say when you're setting up the tests, if anything goes wrong, who's responsible for this, so that if something does go wrong, you automatically send them out to the owner, who hopefully will figure out what's going on and fix it. Now, when I've been talking about this, I've kind of been making the assumption, and possibly you have as well, that the problem has been an actual problem. Something has gone wrong. But of course, there's the other possibility as well, which is you didn't set up the system properly in the first place. So you get something that's been flagged as an error that wasn't really. Either way, you have to fix it. Fix the error or fix the test. You can then analyze what's gone on. You can look at all of the controls that you've put in place, figured out which ones have worked, which ones haven't, which ones have caused a risk to your organisation. Don't forget, governance, risk and compliance, maybe 3 different words, but they all link together. So if you have a compliance issue, you've got a huge issue of risk, which means that your governance has failed. And we talked about that in week 1, I think. So you will regularly go through what you've set up and try to understand how things have worked and create reports to understand what you're going to do about them. So that's definitely part of your compliance, but also could be a legislative issue, because those reports that you create might be stuff that you submit to a regulatory body to say, yes, we have done this. Yes, we have done the things that you've asked us to do. We are clean. And hopefully, if you're a well-run organisation, you'll then go through those. People will sit down and go, okay, so we've set these up. Some have worked, some haven't. What do we do now? You make it better. Whether that's changing the controls, changing the testing, doing whatever you need to do to make this whole process work better. So we're back to that PDCA stuff again. Plan, do, check, act. Here we're planning our controls, doing them, checking the work, and act to fix them if anything's gone wrong. So again, we're into this virtuous circle for our compliance of making it continually better. Nice quick one for this. Any questions? No, all happy? Okay, if you're all happy, I am going to stop the recording. So as ever, the recordings will be available on YouTube. The playlist is there, along with previous year's versions.